During my great-grandson's visit, I heard my granddaughter say to my grandson, "Don't let her near the kids, she's a bad influence." They just forgot who was paying for the kids' school. Your presence here means so much to me. Watch until the end and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story has reached. I never thought my family would see me as a burden. Not after everything I'd sacrificed for them. But that Thursday afternoon changed everything. I was visiting my grandson David's house to meet my great-grandson, little James, who had just turned 3 months old. I'd brought a handmade quilt I'd spent months working on, stitching love into every pattern. "Hello? David?" I called, knocking gently on the half-open door. No answer. I stepped inside, hearing voices from the kitchen. As I approached, I heard my granddaughter-in-law Sarah's voice, sharp and clear. "Don't let her stay too long with the kids. She's a bad influence." My heart stopped. I froze in the hallway, clutching the quilt to my chest. "Mom thinks she's too old-fashioned," Sarah continued. "We don't want James picking up her outdated values." David's reply was softer, harder to hear. "I know, but we still need her help with the tuition payments. Just be nice for an hour." The quilt nearly slipped from my trembling hands. I'd been paying for their children's private school education for years. I'd dipped into my retirement savings when David lost his job last year. And this was how they saw me? A necessary evil? Someone to tolerate for financial gain? I wanted to burst into the kitchen and confront them. I wanted to remind them that I'd worked 2 jobs after Harold died 30 years ago to raise my son, Michael, who then gave me David. I wanted to tell them about the dreams I'd abandoned, the vacations never taken, the retirement fund depleted, all to give them the life they enjoyed now. Instead, I quietly placed the quilt on a chair near the entrance and left, tears blurring my vision as I drove home. My house felt emptier than usual that evening. I wandered from room to room, looking at the family photos displayed on every surface. Michael in his graduation cap. David on his wedding day. Sarah and David with their first child, Emma. Me, always on the periphery, smiling proudly at their accomplishments. I sat on my worn sofa, sinking into the cushions that had supported me through countless lonely nights. The truth crashed over me in waves. I was just the family ATM. The outdated grandmother. The bad influence. My phone buzzed. A text from David. "Where were you?" We waited. I stared at the message. Should I confront him? Tell him I'd overheard everything? Or pretend nothing happened? Not feeling well, I typed back. "We'll visit another day." 3 dots appeared immediately. "Get better soon. By the way, Emma's school is asking about next semester's payment." No asking how I was feeling. No offer to bring soup or medicine. Just a reminder about money. The phone slipped from my fingers onto the carpet. 62 years old, widowed for 3 decades, and completely alone despite having a family. The realization cut deeper than any knife could. That night, I pulled out old photo albums, tracing Harold's face in our wedding pictures. "What would you tell me to do?" I whispered to his smiling image. Harold had always been the strong one, the voice of reason. The answer came not from him, but from somewhere deep inside me. This wasn't about money. It was about respect. About being valued as more than just a checkbook. Morning found me with puffy eyes but a clearer mind. For years, I'd been letting my guilt and loneliness drive my decisions. I'd thrown money at my family, hoping to buy their love and time. But all I'd done was teach them that I was only good for financial support. My phone rang as I was making coffee. David again. "Grandma?" "About Emma's tuition." I took a deep breath, my hand tightening around the phone. The woman who answered was not the same one who had driven away in tears yesterday. Something had shifted inside me, like a door long stuck that had finally broken free. "David," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "we need to talk." The call with David went exactly as I expected. I told him I needed to rethink my financial commitments, and his voice immediately tensed. "Grandma, is everything okay? Are you having money problems?" He sounded concerned, but I noticed it wasn't concern for my well-being. It was fear that his safety net might be disappearing. "I'm just reassessing some things," I said carefully. A pause. "But Emma's tuition is due next week. It's nearly $5,000. I closed my eyes, fighting back the hurt. "No, I understand," or "let's talk about this." Just panic about the money. "I'll transfer it this time," I said. "But David, we need to have a serious conversation about expectations going forward." He exhaled with relief. "Thanks, Grandma. You're a lifesaver." "About that conversation, can we do it later? Sarah's got a doctor's appointment, and I'm swamped at work." Later never seemed to come with my family. I transferred the $5,000 that afternoon, watching my account balance drop yet again. Over the past 5 years, I'd spent nearly $200,000 on tuition, summer camps, and emergencies for David's family. I'd sold the family home, the one Harold and I had bought as newlyweds, to help Sarah start her boutique business, which failed within a year. I'd emptied my vacation fund to cover David's gambling debts, which he swore were a one-time mistake. All because I couldn't stand the thought of being alone. Of being cut out completely. The irony was crushing. I'd already been cut out, I just hadn't accepted it until now. For weeks after overhearing Sarah's comment, I paid closer attention to patterns I'd previously ignored. How my calls went unanswered unless I mentioned helping with expenses. How visits were scheduled and cancelled at the last minute. How Emma and James were suddenly sick whenever I asked to spend time with them. One day, while looking for a spare phone charger in my son Michael's office during one of my rare visits to his house, I found a notebook. Flipping through it, my heart sank when I saw a page titled Mom's Assistance, with a detailed account of all the financial help I'd provided. At the bottom, in Michael's neat handwriting, estimated inheritance value, $300,000 to $400,000. Timeline, 5 to 10 years. They were calculating how much more they could get from me, and how long they'd have to wait. I closed the notebook with shaking hands, feeling physically ill. The son I'd raised alone, worked multiple jobs for, sacrificed everything for, he saw me as a balance sheet. An investment with a finite return date. That night, I couldn't sleep. The weight of decades of silence pressed on my chest. All the times I'd swallowed my opinions to keep the peace. All the financial requests I'd agreed to despite my concerns. All the disrespect I'd tolerated, hoping they'd eventually see me as more than a checkbook. Morning found me exhausted but resolved. I called my bank and scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor. 3 days later, I sat across from Linda, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, reviewing my accounts, "you've made significant withdrawals over the past decade. At this rate, your retirement funds will be depleted in less than 5 years." I nodded, a lump in my throat. "I know. I've been helping my family." "And are they helping you?" she asked, looking up sharply. The question hit me like a physical blow. Were they? When I'd fallen and sprained my ankle last winter, I'd called David 3 times before he reluctantly came to drive me to the doctor, and he'd complained about missing a golf game the entire time. "I need to make changes," I finally said. "I need to protect what's left." Linda helped me restructure my accounts, setting up automatic payments for my own needs and placing the bulk of my assets in accounts that couldn't be easily accessed on impulse. We created a modest monthly budget for family assistance, much smaller than what I'd been providing. "This won't be easy," she warned as I prepared to leave. "People don't like having their expectations challenged." Her words proved prophetic. The very next day, my phone rang with David's ringtone. "Grandma, there's an emergency. Emma got accepted to this amazing summer STEM program, but the deposit is due tomorrow. It's $3,500. Once, I would have transferred the money immediately, grateful to be needed. Now, I took a deep breath and thought of the notebook in Michael's office. The calculated timeline of my usefulness. I'm sorry, David, but I can't help with that right now. His shock was palpable in the silence that followed. What do you mean you can't? This is Emma's future we're talking about. I understand, but... Is this because I had to cancel lunch last week? Are you punishing Emma because of that? The accusation stung. Of course not. I've just made some financial changes. Changes? His voice hardened. What kind of changes? I've reassessed my budget. I can help with small expenses, but large amounts like this aren't possible anymore. David's tone shifted from shock to anger. Does Dad know about this? Because we were counting on your help. Sarah might have to go back to work if we can't afford the kids' education and activities. The implication was clear. I was selfishly disrupting their comfortable lifestyle. Maybe that wouldn't be a bad thing, I said quietly. Wow. David's voice dripped with disappointment. I never thought you'd be so selfish, Grandma. After everything we've done for you. The call ended abruptly, leaving me alone with the echoing question, what, exactly, had they ever done for me? I expected angry phone calls after declining David's request for the STEM program money. What I didn't expect was complete silence. For 2 weeks, no one called. No one texted. It was as if I'd suddenly ceased to exist. Then came the invitation to Sunday dinner at Michael's house. My son's voice on the phone was carefully pleasant, with no mention of my conversation with David. It's been too long, Mom, he said. The whole family will be there. Something in his tone made me uneasy, but I agreed to come. Perhaps this was an olive branch, a chance to establish new, healthier boundaries with my family. I wore my best blouse and brought a homemade apple pie, Harold's favorite recipe. Michael's house was buzzing with activity when I arrived. Emma ran past me without a greeting, absorbed in her tablet. David gave me a stiff nod. Sarah didn't even look up from her phone. Michael ushered me in with a too bright smile. Mom, you're here. Let me take that pie. His wife, Cynthia, was arranging flowers in the dining room. She glanced up briefly. Brenda. Nice of you to make it. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Throughout the meal, conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. They discussed vacations, school events, and neighborhood gossip, rarely including me. When Emma mentioned her STEM program, Sarah shot me a cold look. We managed to make it work, she said pointedly. Some sacrifices were necessary, but family supports family, right? I took a sip of water, noticing how Michael and David exchanged glances. After dinner, as Cynthia served coffee, Michael cleared his throat. Mom, we need to discuss something important. The room went silent. Even Emma looked up from her tablet. We're concerned about you, Michael continued, his voice dripping with artificial concern. Living alone at your age, managing your finances. I'm only 62, I interrupted. And I'm perfectly capable of managing my life. David leaned forward. Grandma, we're worried you're making bad decisions. Like suddenly cutting off help for Emma's education. And refusing to help with James's preschool deposit, Sarah added. I frowned. You never asked me about any preschool deposit. She waved dismissively. Because David said you'd become unreliable. My heart pounded as I looked around the table, at these people who had gathered not out of love, but to stage an intervention. For what? For daring to set boundaries? We think, Michael said carefully, it might be time to consider a different arrangement. Dad left the house to both of us. If we sold it, we could use the money for the kids' education, and you could move into a nice senior apartment. The words hit me like a physical blow. They wanted to take my home, the only place I had left that was truly mine. Michael, that house is where I live. It's my home. It's a big house for one person, Cynthia chimed in. And the market is excellent right now. I set down my coffee cup with a sharp clink. The house isn't for sale. Michael's face hardened. Mom, you need to be practical. You're getting older. Your savings won't last forever. Especially with how much you've helped us, David added, apparently missing the irony. This way, you're still helping the family, but we're also making sure you're taken care of. Taken care of? I repeated. By taking my home and putting me in some apartment while you use the money for yourselves? Sarah scoffed. It's for the children's future. Aren't your grandchildren's futures important to you? Something inside me snapped. Years of silently accepting disrespect, of giving until it hurt, of being taken for granted, it all came rushing to the surface. Their futures are important, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. But so is mine. So is my dignity. And neither of those things seems to matter to any of you. Mom, Michael started. No, I cut him off. For once, you're going to listen to me. I've spent decades putting everyone else first. I've given you money, time, love, and what have I gotten in return? I'm called a bad influence. I'm only contacted when you need something. I'm expected to hand over my home because it's convenient for you. The shock on their faces would have been satisfying if I wasn't so hurt. I overheard Sarah telling David not to let me near the children because I'm a bad influence, I continued, looking directly at my granddaughter-in-law. That same week, you asked me for $5,000 for their tuition. Sarah's face flushed. You were eavesdropping? And I found your notebook, Michael, I turned to my son. Estimated inheritance value. Timeline, 5 to 10 years. Planning my death while asking for my help? Michael paled. That was just financial planning, Mom. No, I said, standing up. That was calculating how much more you could squeeze from me before I die. Well, I'm not dead yet. And I won't be treated this way anymore. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. No one moved to stop me. If you walk out now, Michael called after me, don't expect things to go back to normal. I turned at the door, looking at the family I'd sacrificed everything for. I certainly hope they don't, I said quietly, and closed the door behind me. In my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, I finally let the tears come. But they weren't tears of defeat, they were tears of release. For the first time in decades, I had spoken my truth. The house felt different when I returned that night, quieter, but somehow less empty. As if by standing up for myself, I'd filled the space with something new, dignity. I kicked off my shoes and made a cup of tea, Harold's old armchair creaking as I settled into it. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Michael, alternating between guilt trips and thinly veiled threats about legal options regarding the house. I turned the phone off. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a life centered around my own needs and desires. What did I want? The question felt foreign after decades of considering everyone else first. Sleep came more peacefully than I expected. In the morning, I woke with purpose. First, I called my bank and scheduled another appointment with Linda, the financial advisor. Next, I contacted a lawyer friend had recommended, someone who specialized in elder law. I need to protect myself, I told him during our initial consultation. My family is pressuring me to sell my house, and I'm concerned about what they might try next. He nodded, unsurprised. Unfortunately, this situation is common. Let's discuss your options. By week's end, I had a comprehensive plan in place. The lawyer helped me establish a trust for my house and remaining assets. I updated my will, removing Michael as executor and naming a trusted friend instead. I set up a small educational trust for Emma and James that could only be accessed when they turned 18, bypassing their parents entirely. Most importantly, I filed for a restraining order against Michael and David after they showed up at my house, pounding on the door and shouting threats when I refused to let them in. You can't hide from us forever. Michael had yelled. You owe this family after everything we've done for you. The police officer who responded was kind but firm. Ma'am, you should document these incidents. Family or not, this behavior is harassment. Each step I took to protect myself brought both grief and relief. I was mourning the family I thought I had while freeing myself from the family they actually were. The real surprise came 3 weeks after the disastrous dinner. A knock at my door revealed Cynthia, Michael's wife, standing awkwardly on my porch. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I hesitated but stepped aside. She sat stiffly on the edge of my sofa. "I'm not here on Michael's behalf," she said quickly. "He doesn't know I'm here." "Then why are you here?" She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "What you said about the notebook, about them planning your..." She trailed off. "Death," I finished for her. "Yes. I didn't know about that." She looked up, her eyes troubled. "And I've been thinking about how they treat you. How we all treat you. It's not right." I remained silent, waiting. "The night you left, they were furious," she continued. "Not because they hurt you, but because their plan failed. Michael and David stayed up late talking about legal ways to challenge your ownership of the house." My stomach tightened, but I wasn't surprised. "That's when I started paying attention," Cynthia said. "Really paying attention. To how they talk about you when you're not there. To how they've been using you for years." She paused. "I'm ashamed I was part of it. Why tell me this now?" She took a deep breath. "Because I'm leaving Michael. And I thought you should know you're not crazy. You're not selfish. You just finally saw what I've been ignoring for too long, that my husband sees people as resources, not as human beings." After Cynthia left, I sat in Harold's chair, processing our conversation. If even Cynthia, who had benefited from my financial support, could recognize the toxicity, perhaps I wasn't overreacting. The next day, I did something I'd been putting off for decades. I dug out my old art supplies, the paints and brushes Harold had given me for our last anniversary before his death. "Don't give up on your dreams," he'd said. But I had, focusing instead on everyone else's needs and wants. The community center offered art classes on Tuesday evenings. I enrolled, hands shaking with excitement as I filled out the form. My first class was terrifying and exhilarating. Most students were younger, but the instructor, Eleanor, was around my age. My initial attempts were clumsy. 3 decades of creative neglect had taken their toll, but Eleanor was encouraging. "Art isn't about perfection," she said, studying my hesitant brushstrokes. "It's about expression. And you, my dear, have plenty to express." Over the following weeks, I established new routines centered around my own interests. I joined a book club. I volunteered at the local animal shelter. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected while catering to my family's demands. One such friend, Margaret, invited me to coffee after seeing me at the art class. "I've missed you," she said simply. "After Harold died, you just disappeared into your role as mother and grandmother." "I thought that's what I was supposed to do," I admitted. "Put everyone else first." She shook her head. "My mother did that. Gave everything to my brother and me. By the time she died, she'd never traveled, never pursued her passions, never lived for herself. Her last words to me were, 'Don't make my mistake.' I promised her I wouldn't." Margaret's words stayed with me, reinforcing my resolve. I was not going to end my life with that same regret. The legal maneuvers Michael threatened never materialized. My lawyer's cease and desist letter had apparently made an impression. The texts and calls gradually decreased, though occasionally I'd receive a particularly nasty message after they discovered another financial support had been withdrawn. Each day brought small victories. I learned to enjoy solitude without feeling lonely. I made new friends who valued me for myself, not what I could provide. I rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried beneath years of giving. "You look different," Eleanor commented one evening as we packed up our supplies after class. "When you first started coming, there was a heaviness about you. It's lifting." I smiled, realizing she was right. The weight of silent resentment, of unspoken hurt, of constant guilt, it was finally beginning to lift. That night, I took out an old leather-bound journal and began to write. Not just about the pain of recent events, but about the future I was now allowing myself to imagine. A future shaped by my own choices, not by the demands and expectations of others. For the first time in 30 years, I was putting myself first. And it felt right. 3 months after my confrontation with Michael and David, the certified letter arrived. I recognized the law firm's name on the return address, Whitfield and Associates, one of the most expensive firms in the city. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it. The contents were worse than I expected. Michael was petitioning for guardianship over me, claiming I was mentally incompetent to manage my financial affairs and at risk of exploitation due to diminished capacity. He cited my sudden personality change and irrational financial decisions as evidence. I sat heavily on the kitchen chair, the letter dropping from my fingers. They were trying to take everything, not just my money or my house, but my very autonomy. I called my lawyer immediately. "This is serious," he confirmed after I read him the letter. "But not insurmountable. They're banking on the stereotype of the confused elderly woman who needs protection from herself. We need to prove you're anything but." The following weeks were a blur of medical evaluations, cognitive tests, and meetings with financial experts who could testify to my competence. Through it all, a cold fury kept me focused. This wasn't just about money anymore, this was about my dignity, my independence, my right to self-determination. My art instructor, Eleanor, accompanied me to several appointments. During one car ride, she confessed something startling. "I went through something similar with my son," she said quietly. "After my husband died, my son tried to convince me to move into a retirement home and let him manage my finances. When I refused, he started telling family members I was showing signs of dementia." I glanced at her, surprised. "What did you do?" "I fought back," she said simply. "And I won." Her words gave me the courage I needed as the court date approached. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in a blue suit I'd purchased specifically for the occasion. Not black, which might appear too severe, but a deep, confident blue that Eleanor said brought out the strength in my eyes. The courthouse was intimidating, but I held my head high as I walked in with my lawyer. Michael, David, and Sarah were already there, huddled with their expensive attorney. Michael wouldn't meet my eyes. Sarah whispered something to David, who glanced at me with a mixture of anger and uncertainty. I took my seat, focusing on my breathing. The judge, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, called the hearing to order. Michael's attorney presented first, painting a picture of a grieving widow who had suddenly turned against her family, making irrational, financial decisions that threatened her security. He submitted statements from Michael, David, and Sarah describing my erratic behavior and paranoid accusations. "Mrs. Mitchell has withdrawn financial support that she committed to providing," the lawyer concluded. "She's filed baseless restraining orders against family members who only want to help her. These are not the actions of someone thinking clearly." When it was our turn, my lawyer countered with medical reports affirming my cognitive health, statements from the financial advisor attesting to the soundness of my revised planning, and affidavits from friends like Margaret and Eleanor describing my increased well-being since establishing boundaries with my family. Then I took the stand. "Mrs. Mitchell," my lawyer asked, "could you tell the court why you decided to change your financial arrangements with your family?" I looked directly at Michael as I answered. "For years, I've provided substantial financial support to my son and grandson's families. I paid for private school tuition, helped with mortgage payments, and funded various projects. I did this willingly, out of love. What changed?" I took a deep breath. I discovered that while accepting this support, they viewed me as a burden. 3 months ago, I overheard my granddaughter-in-law telling my grandson not to let me near my great-grandchildren because I was a bad influence. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I also found a notebook in my son's office where he had calculated my inheritance value and estimated a timeline of 5 to 10 years, essentially, how much longer I would live and what they could expect to get from me. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge's gaze sharpened, focusing on Michael, who had turned pale. After confronting my family about these discoveries, they attempted to pressure me into selling my house, supposedly for my benefit, but with the proceeds going to them. When I refused and began establishing appropriate boundaries, they escalated to harassment, leading me to file for the restraining order. So your financial decisions were a response to discovering how your family viewed you? My lawyer clarified. Yes, I said firmly. They weren't sudden or irrational. They were measured responses to protect myself from exploitation. The judge asked several penetrating questions, particularly about the notebook I'd mentioned. Michael's attorney attempted to dismiss it as standard estate planning, but the damage was done. After a brief recess, the judge returned with her decision. I find no evidence to support the petition for guardianship, she stated clearly. Mrs. Mitchell has demonstrated sound judgment and clear reasoning. Further, I find this petition itself to be troubling, appearing more as an attempt to regain control over Mrs. Mitchell's assets than genuine concern for her welfare. She looked directly at Michael. I'm dismissing this petition with prejudice and ordering the petitioner to pay all legal costs incurred by Mrs. Mitchell in defending herself against these allegations. Relief washed over me like a wave. Outside the courtroom, Eleanor hugged me tightly. You did it, she whispered. You stood up for yourself. As we walked toward the exit, Michael approached, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. Mom, he said, voice low and urgent. This isn't over. I looked at my son, this stranger who had attempted to declare me incompetent rather than respect my choices, and felt a surprising calm. Yes, Michael, I said quietly. It is. 6 months after the court hearing, I stood in my living room surrounded by half-packed boxes. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air as I wrapped Harold's old fishing trophies in newspaper. Are you sure about this? Margaret asked, carefully placing framed photos in a carton. I nodded, surveying the house I'd lived in for over 30 years. It's time. After winning the guardianship case, I'd made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I was selling the house. Not because Michael or David wanted me to, but because I wanted something new. Something that was entirely mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. After fighting so hard to keep my home, I was leaving it willingly. But the difference was profound. This was my choice, made for my reasons. I'd found a charming cottage near the coast, just 10 minutes from Eleanor's art studio where I now worked part-time as an assistant instructor. It was smaller than my current house, but it had character, a sunroom perfect for painting, a garden I could tend, and most importantly, no painful memories lurking in every corner. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with Emma, my great-granddaughter. At 12, she was already showing signs of the young woman she would become, tall and serious-eyed. Emma, I said, surprised. What are you doing here? She shifted awkwardly. Dad doesn't know I'm here. I rode my bike. I ushered her inside, offering her a glass of lemonade. She perched on the edge of the sofa, looking around at the boxes. You're really moving? I nodded. To the coast. I've always wanted to live near the ocean. She traced a pattern on the condensation of her glass. Will you still be my great-grandma after you move? The question caught me off guard. Of course I will. Nothing can change that. But Dad and Grandpa say you abandoned the family. I sat beside her, choosing my words carefully. Emma, sometimes adults disagree about things. Your dad and Grandpa wanted me to make certain choices, and I wanted to make different ones. That doesn't mean I don't care about you. They say you stopped loving us because you stopped paying for my school. The directness of children could be breathtaking. I never stopped loving you, I said firmly. But I needed to make changes in how I was supporting the family. I actually set up a special account for your education that you can access when you're 18. Her eyes widened. Really? Really? It's just between us. For your college or whatever dreams you want to pursue. She smiled hesitantly, then grew serious again. Mom says you're selfish. What do you think? I asked gently. She considered this, twirling a strand of hair around her finger, a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood that it made my heart ache. I think grown-ups are complicated," she finally said. "And maybe everybody's a little bit right and a little bit wrong." I smiled at her wisdom. "That sounds about right to me." After Emma left, promising to visit me at the cottage, if Dad ever calms down, I returned to my packing with a lighter heart. Perhaps all bridges weren't burned after all. The day of the move arrived bright and clear. Eleanor, Margaret, and several friends from my art class helped load the moving van. As I locked the front door for the last time, a car pulled into the driveway. It was Cynthia. We hadn't spoken since our conversation months ago, though I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that her divorce from Michael was finalized. "I wanted to say goodbye," she said, getting out of her car. "And to give you this." She handed me a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a delicate watercolor of my old house, painted in soft morning light. I took up painting, she explained with a small smile. "Apparently your courage was contagious." I hugged her, touched by the gesture. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "Michael's been asking about you. Not directly, but through friends. I think he misses you." I considered this. Perhaps someday we'll find a way back to each other. But it would have to be different, based on respect, not what I can provide. "I hope you find that," she said sincerely. The coastal cottage welcomed me like an old friend. Smaller than my previous home, it nevertheless felt spacious with its open floor plan and abundant natural light. The sunroom immediately became my painting studio, where I spent hours each day working on watercolors that grew steadily more confident. My first solo exhibition at the Community Arts Center was a modest success. I sold 3 paintings and received a commission for a 4th. Eleanor beamed with pride as she introduced me to local art collectors as our most promising late bloomer. I laughed at the description but embraced it. Late bloomer. It fit perfectly. 1 year to the day after the court hearing, I hosted a small dinner party at my cottage. Eleanor, Margaret, and several other friends gathered around my table, raising glasses to celebrate what Eleanor called my rebirth day. To Brenda, Eleanor toasted, who taught us all that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Later, as we enjoyed coffee on the patio overlooking the twilit beach, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Emma. "Dad said I could visit next weekend if that's okay with you." I smiled, showing the message to Margaret. "Are you ready for that?" she asked. "For them to come back into your life?" I looked out at the horizon, where the darkening sky met the endless sea. "On my terms," I said. "This time, on my terms." Life rarely gives us perfect endings. Michael and I still had a long road to travel before we could rebuild any semblance of a healthy relationship, if we ever could. Sarah remained distant and resentful. David occasionally reached out with awkward, tentative messages, more for Emma's sake than his own. But I had found something more valuable than a perfect family narrative. I had found myself. The woman who had been buried under decades of self-sacrifice and silent resentment had emerged, paintbrush in hand, to claim her place in the world. At 63, I was finally learning how to put myself first without guilt. I was discovering that boundaries weren't selfish, they were necessary. And I was finding joy in simple pleasures, the perfect brushstroke, morning walks on the beach, evenings with friends who truly saw me. As twilight deepened into night, I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and stepped onto the sand. The waves whispered secretively as they rushed to shore, then retreated. Like life itself, advancing, receding, but always in motion. "I did it, Harold," I whispered to the stars overhead. "I found my way." And in the gentle crash of the waves, I could almost hear him answer, "I always knew you would."